Welcome to this Goldsmiths Counselling Service and Wellbeing Team session on emotional resilience and self-care. I'm Rachel Shepley, one of the counselling team, and I'll be guiding you through the content of this session today. Emotional resilience and self-care are terms we hear a lot these days, and through this session, we want to offer the chance for you to explore in a bit more depth what these terms actually mean in a way that can feel practical and helpful for you. As the COVID-19 has surrounded us, impacting our personal and working lives, we think it has never been more vital, as fellow caring professionals, that there are opportunities for us to reflect upon our needs as we support others, and we really hope this content is useful for you. Members of our team will be available to speak with you at the time this session is timetabled to offer guidance and signposting advice. To get the most out of the session, we've suggested that you work through the content with someone else or in a small group. Although you are doing this session remotely and we're not meeting in a face-to-face big group situation, it's still important to think about confidentiality and ground rules. We suggest that you agree to keep any conversations you have with your course peers confidential between yourselves, that you only share what you feel comfortable to, that you take time away from the session if you need to, and that if you need to check in with one of our team, you're able to do so by emailing using the information on the slides, and then possibly linking in over Microsoft Teams at the time the session is running. The aims for this emotional resilience and self-care session are to get a clear understanding of what it means to be emotionally resilient and how we can achieve this, to highlight how stress and our stress response can impact you as an individual generally and during your training, skills to support good interpersonal relationships, effective boundaries and self-care, looking at the importance of self-compassion in resilience, and highlighting an increased awareness of Goldsmiths support services. So for this first exercise, either working by yourself, with somebody else, or in a small group, we'd like you to think about what we mean by emotional resilience. And we'd also like you to think about where we get this from. How do we learn to be emotionally resilient? So now that you've had some time to think for yourselves about what emotional resilience is and how we become emotionally resilient, we're presenting some definitions here. Emotional resilience concerns our ability to deal with pressure and manage the impact that stress has upon our lives. We learn ways of coping with pressure and stress from when we are born, and in our early years we'll have modelled these from our own caregivers. Now, some of these ways of coping will continue to work for us. And sometimes, often when we face new challenges, we realise that these ways don't work so well anymore, and it's time to learn new skills. It's our belief that we all have the capacity to develop emotional resilience, but the ways that we do this will vary according to the individual. So why is thinking about emotional resilience so important for you as social work students? Perhaps you could just think together briefly about some ideas as to why we think it's so important. We know that as caring professionals, we're supposed to use professional boundaries to separate ourselves out from our clients. But it is also important to acknowledge that we will share some of the same issues as our clients. Social work students are caring professionals who are still dealing with balancing many demands, particularly of your course, academic work, placement client work, communications between university, placement and fellow students. You will be supporting clients who will be sharing traumatic and distressing material. You may be supporting family and having caring responsibilities yourselves. You may be managing financial concerns. You may be dealing with the impact of physical and mental health issues. You will be managing unexpected and uncontrollable life events. And you'll also be dealing with societal and cultural issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, etc. All of these different pressures, especially at this time, give the potential for stress to accumulate. So how much stress can we cope with? In engineering terms, stress implies a load or a force applied to a structure which will withstand it until some limit inherent in the structure is exceeded and collapse occurs. There is a parallel in human terms. People have a capacity to withstand stress up to a certain limit, and actually we need stress up to a certain limit for best performance. But we will collapse or break down if this limit is exceeded. Our minds and bodies are not designed to cope with infinite amounts of stress, and as each person has their own unique capacity for managing stress, there is little point in comparing ourselves to others. This video clip talks about the cumulative impact of multiple stressors. After watching this, take some time, alone if you would prefer, to think about the water that's currently filling your stress bucket. We'd like to invite you to do another exercise. In thinking about stress and managing stress, discuss what you feel your current strategies are for managing stress or switching off. And also, have you had to change or adapt these in the light of COVID-19? The COVID-19 crisis has had a very particular impact upon our stress levels and capacity to self-care. As we know, our brains are already wired to be responsive to threat or danger for survival, the fight, flight, freeze stress response, which was mentioned in the last video. And at the moment, when uncertainty, change and news of danger has become the norm, these responses can feel permanently dialed up or activated with a hair trigger. Matters are much more complicated because we are also wired to reach out to each other for support, comfort and safety when we're in danger. But as we know, the act of doing this at the moment is known to be dangerous and risky in case we contract the disease. That makes it even harder at the moment for us to take care of ourselves. And it's really important to acknowledge this. Thinking about a traffic light system of stress response can be useful in identifying how we're managing stress, how it's impacting us, and most importantly, it can give us some ideas at this time when it's hard to rely on our normal strategies about what we might need to move through these stages. So when we're in the green or regulated zone, we feel calm, socially engaged, productive, we're thinking clearly, we feel able to cope. We'll also be sleeping well and be managing a regular appetite. When we're feeling like this, when we're feeling well, we can take it for granted and we might not want to overthink things by dwelling on this. It can be useful, however, to think about what we're doing at this time, which may make sense of why we're in a good place, which can give us ideas to draw from if in the future we find ourselves struggling. So if you're currently in this place, what do you think is enabling this? What conditions or strategies are working well for you in your life? It's normal for us to feel that surge of adrenaline and raised heart rate in response to a danger or sudden shock. But as we saw in the video, feeling this constantly over time takes its toll. When we're in the amber zone, the fight-flight, we may feel agitated, edgy or anxious, vigilant, over-emotional, keyed up. It may be hard to sleep. We might be eating more or less than usual. And at the moment, this might have become an ordinary state for many of us. So activities which calm us down will be most helpful. Meditation, grounding exercises, yoga, a general slowing down. It can help to take time to disconnect from electronic devices, stopping the constant drip of breaking news, or the general drama of the lives of others. When we're in the red zone or freeze zone, we start to feel disengaged, switched off, withdrawn, stuck, trapped. We lack energy, oversleep, and we don't enjoy activities we used to. Over time, we might start to feel helpless. Red can emerge after a period of amber, and it is common to feel frustrated at not being able to pull myself out of this. It's usually a sign we've been managing stress for too long. Any activities which encourage connection with the world can help. Walking, swimming, grounding strategies to connect you to your surroundings. Small steps for reconnection are best because we can easily become overwhelmed. And it's also really important to talk about the importance of accessing support if you feel your strategies are not working, that you might need to reach out to others. Something I've heard a lot at the moment is, well, if we're all going through the same thing with the COVID crisis, then why should my experiences be any more important than anyone else's? It can be a way we really diminish our own challenges and suffering. So there is a real importance in validating our own experiencing of these current events. And I like this expression. We're all in the same storm, but travelling in different boats, which sort of links as well to the analogy of having, different size stress buckets and different types of water in those buckets. Managing communication and boundaries in relationships. The personal and professional relationships in our lives can be both the greatest sources of support and also stress. And the nature of your role means that you'll be engaged in multiple new relationships with tutors, fellow students, clients, placement colleagues, and managers. How you navigate the personal and professional boundaries of these will be key to supporting your emotional well-being and, of course, managing stress. Boundary definitions. It's really important that we think about professional and personal boundaries because we're working in a caring, supporting, helping capacity. We'll be giving much more of ourselves than we would be if we weren't working with other people. With professional and role-related boundaries, we've written that we define these as effective and appropriate interaction. They often involve time, when something is happening, a place, where it's happening, is it appropriate, and behaviour, how we speak to and treat people. And this is between professionals and the public they serve. And that these boundaries are there to protect both the professional and the client. Personal boundaries are a bit harder to define, but I quite like this definition here. That personal boundaries are the imaginary lines we draw around ourselves to maintain our internal sense of balance and to protect our bodies, minds, emotions and time from the behaviour or demands of others. Slide 19. So we'd like to invite you to do a boundary issues exercise, so if possible with another person or a group of people. We'd like you to think about and hopefully speak about an example where professionally you felt your boundaries were pushed or disregarded. And we'd like to think about how you responded to this. This could be recent or it could be longer ago. And we'd also like you to think about the thoughts and feelings that come up for you about this now, and any ideas about what you would have perhaps liked to do differently. It's really important to remind you that you don't have to speak about anything that feels too uncomfortable. We hope you found reflecting on your experience helpful, and we'd like to offer some tips for skills to support professional boundaries. Notice if you feel your boundaries are being pushed. If you're not sure about how you feel or your thinking feels fuzzy, where possible, ask for time to respond. Can I get back to you? If your time is limited, for example with a client, be clear from the start of any interactions. I've only got 10 minutes. Respect your own personal boundaries by limiting personal disclosures about yourself. You can decide what in your personal life is off limits. And be reflective about your interactions and access support. Identify what you can do or who you can speak with if you feel uncomfortable or stirred up by a difficult situation. This is particularly important if you feel you've been treated inappropriately. Doing this can help us feel calmer so we can think more clearly about our next steps and feel more confident and grounded in any action we may later take.
Hi there, my name is Jamie Scannell. I'm a cognitive behavioural therapist and I work for Goldsmiths Counselling service. For this next part of the workshop, I wanted to introduce you to the concept of self-compassion. So here I've framed it as a kind of antidote to our inner self-critic. Now, when we talk about our inner critic, we're referring to those difficult, critical thoughts, negative thoughts, worries, insecurities that we all have about ourselves from time to time. We can frame this as a sort of internal threat. We may be running an internal computer program, a kind of background noise or a script, something that sounds a bit like I'm not worthy, I'm incompetent, I'm not good enough, I'm stupid, something like I just can't cope. Now, this inner program or this voice can be harsh, cold, it might even be bullying. We might blame ourselves for our plight. And often it's not necessarily our fault, and 9 times out of 10 it's not going to be very helpful. Even though this occurs internally, the body reacts as though it's an external threat. We can become triggered by this, or become hypervigilant to some sort of attack, which in turn activates our fight, flight, freeze system, which I know was touched upon earlier. Now, where do we learn this self-critic from? It's often learned from an expert. So someone significant in our life. Could be a critical parent or a grandparent, a harsh teacher with exacting standards, perhaps another family member, some sort of prominent voice from our past. It could be an ex-partner, or it could be some peers that we've met along the way from our journey from childhood through adolescence to adulthood. More often than not, it actually really hurts. It's painful, makes us feel bad. Or at least it makes us feel even worse than we did in the first place. Now, self-compassion has been evidenced to be an antidote to this self-critic, as it soothes the fight, flight, freeze response. It is a turning inward of compassion, something you may produce readily for your family, your friends, colleagues, clients, service users, but seldom extend to yourselves. So what I want to do is invite you to consider here that rather than being your own harshest critic, perhaps you could support yourself through your greatest challenges by being more of an ally, a great supporter through these trials and tribulations of life. In terms of the neurophysiology of our brains, we are wired for compassion. So when we feel under threat, under stress or duress, our bodies produce adrenaline, cortisol. When we feel at ease and we feel soothed and comforted, we will experience other hormones such as oxytocin, inner opiates, endorphins. Adrenaline triggers an urgency for action, whereas oxytocin and those other inner opiates result in feeling held, secured, loved, supported, as a child or a baby would feel. Now, why am I telling you all this about self-compassion? It's because I wanted to introduce you to an exercise known as the perfect nurturer. This is because some of you may find it easier than others to be self-compassionate. A lot of people struggle to be this way with themselves. It often feels strange or unusual, icky. You might have some quite severe reactions to it sometimes. Therefore, it's often easier to activate a compassion satellite to create or connect with something outside of ourselves, something that will beam compassion back to us. The perfect nurturer is a way of developing an inner framework for this. This is that antidote to the loud and strong inner critic we sometimes live with. So, how do we do this? If I could ask you all to think of someone who has demonstrated or modelled compassion to you, who comes to mind? This could be an historical figure, someone from your past, a kindly grandparent, a nurturing teacher, or a compassionate caregiver. It could be someone in your present life, and actually this can sometimes be really ideal and really useful because you've got unlimited content to develop this perfect nurturer from. Loads of examples and lived embodied experiences that you can use for this sort of exercise. Is it your partner, a close colleague? Could be a mentor of yours. Now, perhaps it comes from your religion, or it's part of your faith. It could be a figure, a guide, a god or a goddess, some aspect of your spiritual life that can guide you through times of struggle. Now, there could be a customizable version of this, the kind of Blue Peter version. Here's one that I made earlier. You may not be happy with working anything religious. It may be that your childhood was unfortunately lacking in supportive people whom you could draw help from. But don't despair. What we're trying to do is access a state of mind, or actually even better, sometimes it's helpful to think of it as a state of heart. And this can again be assisted by your imagination. It doesn't have to come from anything you've actually experienced in life. It could be a famous figure, someone you admire, but maybe you don't know in person, a hero, heroine, from a work of fiction perhaps, literature, television, film, musician or artist you've always felt connected to, perhaps a sporting hero that you've always really, really admired for the way they handle themselves, the way they are. It's completely up to you whether this figure is a coach, a mentor, a spiritual guide. Just ensure that the nurturer is embodied. So we don't want it to be a purely intellectual exercise. We don't want it to be really cognitive and upstairs in our brains. We want it to be really felt. But what I would suggest is that they're non-judgmental, unconditional. They've always got your back. Kind, understanding, encouraging, supportive. Now on to an exercise about how to develop this perfect nurturer. Hopefully you've already started to have a few eureka moments, a few thoughts or images about who this perfect nurturer might actually be. I would absolutely recommend at this point pausing the video and going and engaging with this exercise, or in the very least planning it in for later, scheduling it in, but absolutely writing it down, typing it down, putting it somewhere that perhaps is a bit more deliberate and mindful. It could be in a cherished journal. Perhaps you like the colour of it, or the smell, or the feel of it. Something that's maybe going to be significant for you later down the line. And the first thing to do is, let's name, who is this perfect nurturer? Name that person. Think about their appearance. What do they really look like? What clothes do they wear? What's their complexion? Consider the tone of voice. Think about how they talk. What's the frequency of how they talk? Is it soft? Do they talk quickly? Do they talk loudly? Are they gentle in their approach? Are they more firm? Are there other sounds in the background? Certain harmonies, perhaps music, or it could be birdsong, nature sounds, the sounds of waves perhaps. Is there touch involved? Some people are very calmed and soothed by the tactile sensory nature of touch. It could be holding hands. It could be a hug. It could be someone placing their hand on your shoulder. At the end of the day, it's whatever feels right for you. There's no right or wrong here. It can also be helpful to think about where you want them placed. Do you want them facing you? Would you prefer them sat side by side? Would you prefer them walking alongside you? Consider smell, a very powerful sense of ours. Do they have a certain scent? Perhaps there's a perfume, some sort of aroma, or an aftershave even. Essential oils. It could be a more organic smell that we find in nature. Something that, again, brings soothing, calming feelings. Now think about, what are their particular qualities? What characteristics do they display? How are they in their being? What is it you respond to? Some people prefer a more firm approach. Other people prefer a softer approach. Think about what really works for you. What qualities do you respond to? Let's really think about that. And I'd say put as much detail into this as possible. What is it they actually say? How do they respond to you? How does this perfect nurturer make you feel reassured? Or how do they motivate, encourage, support you? Really think about the language here. It's very important. What is it that you would like to hear at times where you're at your worst, where you're feeling your worst, and perhaps, you're very disrupted? What is it that you need from that moment? And really think about how that might sound. All that's left for me to say is good luck with this perfect nurturer exercise. I think it's a very useful way as an antidote to that harsh inner self-critic, particularly given the jobs that you do and sometimes the harsh realities of it. I hope that it will help with that emotional resilience and add to a bit of self-compassion and self-care in the future. Best of luck.
A common misconception of emotional resilience is that we should be able to do it by ourselves and not rely on others. Human beings are not designed this way. We're built for interconnection, to reach out to others. The mirror neurons in our brains enable us to empathise, feel what another is experiencing, and for that other to feel felt in return. Sometimes, even if we have a solid support network in friends and family, we need more support than they can offer, especially if we've been coping with stress over a prolonged period. The Goldsmiths Wellbeing team are the first point of contact if you'd like to access support at Goldsmiths. They support all students experiencing any worry, emotional or mental health distress, which has the potential to impact upon academic performance, experience of university or your personal life. And we've included the web pages for you to take a look just here. After an initial meeting, you receive a wellbeing plan, which can signpost you to support you may wish to access. And this can include information about accessing GP surgery. We have specialist mental health advisors at Goldsmiths who can offer support with more complex mental health needs. You can be signposted to specialist sexual and domestic violence support services. You can also be signposted to the Goldsmiths Counselling service. We offer short-term counselling, CBT, and we can refer to external and specialist agencies. And you may also want some support liaising with your academic department. So to summarise, we're recognising that at this time, social work students may be managing similar issues and responses to those who you're trying to help. We're living in a time when it's ordinary not to be okay and when we face real barriers to using our usual tools and self-care strategies. Our own connections with others and ourselves is vital at this time, especially when we are responding to the needs of others. And emotional resilience is never about managing everything by yourself. Humans are just not designed this way. We'd really recommend that you reach out for university-based and professional help before you reach your tipping point.